Fan Fiction and Beta Reading for Education by Fabio Montella. In the realm of formal learning, the traditional brick-and-mortar building is seen as a temple of sorts for educators and students alike. Traditional classrooms, those occupied by teachers and students within a physical structure, have allowed educators to create a formal learning environment that allows for the continuous flow of information and knowledge from one individual to the next. However, the digital age in which we now reside has challenged the concept of a formal learning environment within a traditional classroom and has introduced a variety of alternative informal learning environments. Amongst these options stands the affinity space. According to James Paul Gee, affinity spaces are locations where groups of people are drawn together because of a shared, strong interest or engagement in a common activity. In some circumstances, the commonality of interest or engagement amongst members of an affinity group can allow for an ideal learning environment. Furthermore, affinity spaces can be an effective alternative for those students who find difficulty learning in a formal environment or simply lack the desire to do so. One particularly effective and popular form of affinity space is fan fiction. As defined in Webster's dictionary, fan fiction are stories involving popular fictional characters that are written by fans and often posted on the internet, also called fanfic. In using existing fictional subjects, fan fiction enables writers to focus on other aspects of their writing, such as settings or plots, rather than the creation of a unique character. These creative expressions are part of our larger participatory culture, which Henry Jenkins, director of the Comparative Media Studies program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, defines as a culture with relatively low barriers to artistic expression and civic engagement, strong support for creating and sharing creations, and some type of informal mentorship whereby experienced participants pass along knowledge to novices. Writers of fan fiction flock to the fan fiction site of their choice for the artistic expressions afforded to them and the freedom to write openly about an area of pop culture that they find familiar and connected to. Aside from writing their own unique works, many writers will critique other like-minded works and read similar critiques of their own fan fiction writings. Aside from the critical thinking that accompanies fan fiction writings and its critiques, fan fiction has provided writers with an audience. The luxury of having an authentic audience, aside from a teacher or a select few classmates who might provide constructive feedback, is seldom afforded when writing for a formal classroom assignment. This lack of an authentic audience profoundly affects a student's mode of writing and mental processing. Jen Scott Kerward, Alicia Maria Magnifico, and Jane C. Lammers, the author of an article which focused on the educational benefits of affinity spaces and other online spaces, states the following. Today's technologies have forged new ways that young people can engage with words and ideas. When they post a status update on Facebook, share a story on fanfiction.net, or roleplay on Tumblr, they're writing practices that are inextricably linked to digital tools and online spaces. These, in turn, shape their understanding of audience, purpose, and genre. The aforementioned authors present a concept of fan fiction and affinity spaces in general that I find to be revolutionary when considered in comparison to a traditional classroom setting. The awareness of writing for an authentic audience affects the manner in which fan fiction participants write and leads them to become more socially aware members of our participatory culture. The limited audience that student writers address within a traditional classroom will most likely lead them to write for the sole purpose of a grade or a teacher's approval. Writing for a purpose, whether in a formal or informal learning environment, will produce a work which is reflective of that purpose. Fan fiction, in essence, is creative writing amongst peers. These peers write as fans and share a purpose of appreciating their subjects and one another. While sharing a common appreciation of both a subject and the writing of that subject, writers of fan fiction are participating in acts that provide both a cultural connection with peers and an informal education. Whether these peers have become better writers through social awareness or simply performing a task that they would have avoided or undertaken reluctantly within the formal environment of a traditional classroom, fan fiction is challenging education as we know it. Another aspect of fan fiction that is very beneficial for informal learning is beta reading, which have started to attract some academic attention. These sites, having become affinity spaces themselves, act as editing or proofreading sites for fan fiction writers. The editors and proofreaders of these sites, known as beta readers, receive works that are usually submitted with an accompanying form specifying genre, canon, and an indication of which elements of the paper the author would like feedback on. This accompanying information allows for works to be reviewed by beta readers of like-minded interest and qualified credentials. Furthermore, Rebecca Ward-Black, an associate professor of education at the University of California, argues that these beta reading sites feature meta-discussion on elements of fan fiction, writing, and reviewing that mirror school-based composition practices such as peer review, giving constructive feedback, editing, proofreading, effective plot development, robust characterization, and constructing effective structures, to name just a few. Though much of this structure in beta reading feedback is reflective of school-based composition practices, its focus on fandom is what makes it unique and draws the attention of informal learners. Fan fiction and its accompanying beta reading sites have made a strong case as an effective form of informal learning. Though effective and in many ways more promising than formal education, it is far from being a complete approach to education. It can be emblematic of the positive aspects of affinity spaces, such as peer collaborations and audience awareness, but can also be indicative of the concerns plaguing participatory culture today: the participation gap, the transparency problem, and the ethics challenge. These issues need to be addressed for the betterment of fan fiction, affinity spaces, and participatory culture as a whole. Fan fiction, and the trend towards more digital affinity spaces, puts educators at the forefront of media education and its incorporation into today's curriculums. Jenkins states the role of educators and their responsibilities as follows. Educators must work together to ensure that every American young person has access to the skills and experiences needed to become a full participant, can articulate their understanding of how media shapes perceptions, and has been socialized into the emerging ethical standards that should shape their practices as media thinkers and participants in online communities. Media education can provide students with the needs required of a participatory digital society, but must be acted upon quickly. The growth of fan fiction sites and numerous other affinity spaces means that the growth of fan fiction writers, beta readers, and affinity space users is also increasing. These members of the participatory culture require equal opportunities and a media knowledge that will ensure their effortless transition into our digital society. Fan fiction and beta reading sites have added to the already existing changes within education. Pedagogy, as we know it, seeks to improve the manner in which we teach and the manner in which we learn. Not only do we strive for a more effective form of teaching, we strive for an education that is appealing to a generation of learners being constantly distracted or alienated by digital advances. In this regard, fan fiction and beta reading are truly effective. Participants in these affinity spaces are being educated and are doing so attentively. Their interests are being used to their advantages and their creativities are being fully utilized. Yes, fan fiction, beta reading, and affinity spaces as a whole are not entirely absent of flaws, but they offer an effective alternative to the mundane. If anything, they may provide the foundation for something revolutionary.